These are the paint colors I'll be using for today's floral: Lemon Yellow, Cadmium Red, Ultramarine Blue, Payne's Gray, and Sap Green. You're welcome to pause this video while you gather your colors. I did list these in the video description. Just keep in mind, you don't need the exact colors. Just get some kind of variation of red, some kind of variation of yellow, and so forth, and you'll be fine. These are the supplies I'll be using for today's poppy painting. You can pause the video and see a list of these supplies in the video description. Also in the video description is a line drawing that you can download and print at home. I want you to print it out at the same size you plan on doing the painting. And on the back of your line drawing, just take a pencil and apply graphite over the entire back. Once you've done that, you can position your line drawing on top of your watercolor paper and then trace it using a ballpoint pen. The pressure of your pen is going to push those lines down into your watercolor paper so your subject is ready to go. I have done the transfer early on, so if you need to, just pause the video while you do your line drawing. Once your line drawing is complete, use a kneaded eraser to help clean up any of the scuff marks that are a result of resting your hand or arm on your watercolor paper during the transfer process. I actually used a graphite transfer sheet to do mine, so I just have a lot more scuffs than what you would typically get with the number 2 pencil technique. So I'm going to take a moment to use this kneaded eraser and just press with firm pressure. And my goal is to soften the lines so they're not as dark. Especially in this center bud. This is more of a blurred element in the finished piece, so I want the pencil lines in the center bud to be really nice and light. Once you've lightened up your lines and you're happy with them, then we're going to be using masking fluid. This is the brand I'm going to be using today, but it doesn't really matter. Just get a masking fluid and we will do this next step. I like to put a small amount of water in a cup, and I put some dish soap in there so I can coat my brush with soapy water before I dip into my masking fluid. And then I just rinse in this soapy water frequently throughout to make sure that this masking fluid never has a chance to attach itself to the bristles of my brush. So what we're going to do with this masking fluid is we are going to go around just the inside edge of our pencil lines on the blossom, which is our focal point. I'm just staying right inside the outer edge. Taking my time to apply this really neatly. Masking fluid and the way you apply it is equally as important as the finished painting. And you know what? I'm going to make the personal choice to make this blossom just a little larger. I'm also going to mask the stem for this flower. Trying to maintain consistent thickness. I'm also going to mask this bud on the right-hand side. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. Once we have our masking fluid down, we're going to rinse all of that masking fluid out of our brush using that same cup of soapy water. Once you've confirmed that there is no masking fluid remaining in the bristles of your brush, I then want you to rinse the soapy water out of your brush. And just set your brush aside. So while that masking fluid is drying, I'm going to mix up colors to use in the background of my painting. So to mix my colors, I'm going to use a number 10 round, and I'm going to use this brush to carry as much water over to my paint palette that it will allow. And I'm going to be mixing up a variety of colors to use in the background. So I'm putting water in multiple wells so I can have multiple colors to choose from. I don't need a ton of water. So one of the colors I'm going to be using is a lemon yellow. Once I feel like I have the color right, I use a scrap piece of watercolor paper and I just test out the value of my color. Make sure it's as vibrant as I'd like. I'm now going to use that same lemon yellow to make an orange. I'm going to grab a little bit of Cadmium Red to add with that yellow to make an orange. I'm going to mix some Cadmium Red by itself. And I'm going to mix up two different variations of green. So I'm using the Sap Green, but I want to have one which is just Sap Green by itself and one with just the smallest amount of added red, so it's a little bit more of an olive color. But I want both colors to be pretty vibrant. So I'm going to test out my green. And I am adding the smallest amount of red to my green, mixing it in, and then continuing to just add small increments until I get to an olive color that I like. It's easy to go overboard with this step, which then turns your green straight to brown. Now that I have the colors I want, I'm going to set this scrap piece of paper aside. And I want to check that my masking fluid is completely dry. Once I've confirmed that it is, then I'm going to begin applying clean water to the background. Now, the stem of my blossom here got a little wider than I intended. So I'm going to make the choice of just thinning out some of that masking fluid using a rubber cement pickup, just to lift a little bit of that. And just to make sure the edges are nice and smooth, I'm just going to refine the masking fluid in the area that I just lifted. I'm not adding to it to make it whiter. I'm just cleaning up the edges so they don't look textured, and it gives it more smooth. Okay. So now that my masking fluid is in place, I'm going to dry this stem real quick so we can add water to the background. Now that everything is completely dry, I'm going to use just a large flat brush to apply some clean water all over the background. The water can go on top of the masking fluid. That's not going to hurt anything. The first layer of water is really going to be absorbed quite quickly into your paper. So depending on the sheen of your paper, you might have to add a second layer just to make sure things stay damp long enough for you to bring in color. Now that the water is down, I'm going to start off with adding my yellows first. So I'm using a large number 10 round. I'm going to thoroughly dip my brush in my yellows and just wipe away some of the excess. And I'm just kind of determining where maybe I might want some of these yellows in my background. I'm rinsing all the yellow out of my brush. I don't want to dilute my color, so I'm tapping the sponge to remove the water from my brush before I dip in my next color. Rinsing all of the orange out of my brush, tapping my sponge to remove the excess water before dipping into my red. I'm rinsing all of the red out of my brush, tapping my sponge to remove the water, and I'm going to grab some of that olive green. Now, green and red, when they mix together, they're just going to make a brown. So I'm going to try not to overlap my greens and reds as much as possible. They can be side by side, nothing's wrong with that. I just don't want them completely overlapping very much. I'm just going to get a little bit of orange on my brush. Resaturate some areas that might be drying already. Now I'm going to completely rinse all the paint out of my brush as well as that water, so it's pretty much dry and clean. And I am going to use this brush to kind of blend some of my colors, being mindful of the fact that sometimes blending everything on the paper can just create a bunch of mud. So I'm trying to kind of go slow, blend in moderation. The only reason I'm blending is I just want to make it look more of a blurry background without the colors being so separated. But again, trying to be mindful of the fact that if I blend too much and just keep dragging greens into my reds and vice versa, I'm going to end up with just a really black or not brown background. And if that's not my goal, I need to kind of be selective with my blending. So I'm just taking a moment to ask myself if there's any areas where I would like a little bit more of a vibrant green. And I think I want to kind of imply maybe some stems that are in the background for other flowers that may be blurred. So I'm going to grab my number 6 round. I'm going to get my Sap Green. And I'm just going to trace with my number 6 round where maybe I want the illusion of other flowers in the background without having to actually paint any of their details. I like the idea of there being a blurred flower bud in the background. So I'm going to use some red with green. And it's going to be at the top of my blurred stem, just to kind of give a hint. Now, there's some areas where I feel like it's kind of hard to see where this stem is. So I'm just making a choice to add some color nearby so it stands out a little better. And I'm just using a clean, practically dry brush to kind of blend that color out with the background. And if I need to, I can retrace it with the green. Now there's some areas where my background has completely lost its sheen. So I know that it is very much getting close to drying. So I want to be mindful of that. Stay away from those areas that are already beginning to dry. If there's any areas where I feel like, oh, maybe it got just a little too dark there, I can come in with some of the yellows and just brighten it up a little bit. All right, things are very much drying in the background, so I need to just kind of quit fiddling and get out this little piece of masking fluid. Okay, so I'm going to hit this with the blow dryer. That way we can remove the masking fluid. Now that everything is dry, I'm going to use a rubber cement pickup to help remove the masking fluid from my painting. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. Now that the masking fluid is removed, I'm going to use my pencil just to redraw some of the lines that I lost in that process of removing the masking fluid. So my stem should come up into the base of my flower. The base of my flower should actually show just below where the top of the stem is. And don't feel like your drawing needs to be absolutely perfect. Poppies have so much character in their petals. Now I do have some white little splatters that are a result of painting the background. If I want to remove those, I just use a clean, stiff square brush. And once I have clean water on it, I just find the little specks of paint and I just scrub with clean water to lift them out. Okay. I am going to go ahead and begin painting the flower, but I'm going to paint it one petal at a time. So I'm going to use clean water to apply on just this left petal. I don't want to bring my color. I mean, I could. We're just going to put the color into the fold as well. Why not? So many different ways to paint the same subject. Just have fun. I don't want it to be in the stem. So I'm going to tip my paper so you can see where I applied that clean water. It's very glossy. It's exactly what I want. Now I don't want any puddles, so if you see thick puddles of water, just dry your brush and soak them up. I'm going to start off with an orange. And I didn't bring in a lot of paint. I just dipped it once in my orange. And I'm now just kind of pushing that color around on my paper, because I don't want the petals to get too dark or everything's going to just blend into the background and I'm going to lose the contrast. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab a small amount of the red, but I have the red watered down a bit so it's not too dark. And the thing we have to remember with flowers is it takes multiple layers in order to get the effects we want. So this is just layer one of probably 3 or 4. So don't feel like the colors and everything have to be absolutely perfect at this stage. It's too early. So that's just layer one. I'm going to give this petal some time to dry. And I'm now going to apply clean water to the back side of the petal on the bottom right. So I have everything wet on this back puddle, and I've made sure the water's even, glossy, and without puddles. I'm now going to grab some of that orange. While I have some of that orange in, I'm going to add just a little bit of some watered down red. Just to create a little bit of texture in here. While those two petals are drying, I can't work on anything that's sharing an edge with them. So I'm going to move over to the blossom on the right and get my first layer into that blossom. I want this stem to be more of a lime green. So I'm going to mix some yellow and sap green. And I'm painting wet on dry. And this is a lighter color. I don't have it mixed to be too dark. I'm now going to get some of the olive green. I'm going to paint wet on dry here, and through the center, I'm going to have that olive green. But then on the outside edge, I'm going to do more of that lime green. And I'm applying the colors before either of them have a chance to dry. The reason I'm going around the outside edge with the lime green is to make sure that it doesn't completely blend in with the background colors. I want good contrast. Now I'm going to pause the video so I can blow dry this and paint the next petals. Now that everything is completely dry, I can come in and paint this central petal in the back. I'm going to apply some clean water first. I really take my time when I get close to the edges. Now I'm going to use some of the red, and I'm going to try and really push this red around so it doesn't get too dark. So I'm kind of blending it in with the water on the surface so that it ends up being more of a lighter red and more of a pink shade. I'm using just a clean, damp brush to push some of this paint around right up to the edges. I want it to be a lighter color than some of the background values, so it really stands out. I'm going to give that some time to dry and return to that a little bit later. I'm going to return to this first petal. I'm just going to darken up some of the values. So I'm going to get some orange. I'm going to add just a little bit of red to it, so it's a little bit more of a red orange. Once I have my color the way I want, I'm going to stay just to the right of where the edge of our flower is, because we see a fold that is happening. Now I'm not going to go too far with that paint, and I'm going to use clean water on a damp brush to kind of pull the edges of these paint strokes out so they kind of blend in with the surroundings. So this is called edge softening. I'm just taking a mildly damp brush, not a wet brush, up to the edges of these paint strokes before it dries, and just kind of feathering it out so it blends with the first layer. And I'm going to let that dry. If I overwork it, the more texture I get. So I'm just going to pause there. While that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and come over to, let's see, so you have to hop around with watercolors. We've got a lot of things damp over here, so I'm going to hop over to the blossom on the right. I'm going to grab some of my olive green, and I'm going to darken up where the base of the blossom is. And kind of bring it out through the center. And I'm just going to use a clean, mildly damp brush to kind of soften the edges. When you do the edge softening, it takes practice, but it's all about knowing how much water you need on your brush. You don't want it wet, you don't want it dry, just damp enough. I'm going to take a moment to mix a really dark version of a stem color. So I'm going to use Sap Green. And then I'm going to add some ultramarine blue to it to darken it up. Once I have a nice dark color, I'm going to come into the area of the stem and just paint it dark green. While those are drying, I'm going to check in on this back center petal. Since it's not completely dry, I'm going to hit it with a blow dryer before I keep painting. Now that everything's dry, when I was painting the stem, I noticed a small area that is covered in masking fluid. So I'm going to lift that real quick just to get it off. So the next time I come in with green, I can cover that up. Now I'm going to continue with my number 6 round and just continue to push the contrast of this flower. But I first want to get some color into the areas that I'm missing. So I'm just going to come in to this fold of this petal. Applying clean water. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I'm going to now grab some of that red. I'm also going to grab a little bit of the orange. And now I'm going to rinse and dry my brush off on my sponge. And with this dry brush, I can just delicately push my color right up to the edge of that petal. And since my brush isn't overloaded with tons of paint, it helps me maintain clear visibility of where the paint is and where I need it to be. I'm going to rinse my brush, get all the water out, And I'm just going to blend this color up to this corner. And I want it to be very, very soft and faint because this corner gets hit hard by the light. At the base of the flower, it's okay to be a little darker with the colors. I'm soaking up the puddles of paint so it's easier for me to control where it's going. I'm going to apply a little bit of orange on this back corner, painting wet on dry. I'm going to get a little bit of that dark green to cover that area that I had masking fluid. And while those areas are drying, I'm going to come in and try and give some definition for the underside of the fold here. I'm going to be switching to a larger brush, and I'm putting clean water on it. And very gently, I'm going to apply this clean water under the fold on this petal. The key when you do that over previous layers, just be really, really gentle with your touch. Don't press down real hard. Now I'm going to switch to my number 6 round, and I'm going to now get more vibrant colors to really make this fold pop forward. Anytime the color may have creeped into an area where you don't want it, just rinse your brush really good and dry it off on your sponge or paper towel. And go into the area that you want to pick up and press down with firm pressure with your clean, dry brush. And your brush is going to help soak up some of that paint. And if you need to, you can come in with a dry paper towel and press with firm pressure just to kind of keep things out of that zone. Remember, anytime you need to just pause the video so you can catch up, go ahead and do that. It makes things easier. I'm going to let that paint dry. And meanwhile, I'm going to hop over to the blossom on the right and continue to kind of push my values. I'm going to use some of that dark green that had the ultramarine blue in it. I'm going to add the smallest amount of Payne's gray. Just to make it even darker still. And I want to kind of create a crease in this petal, or bud, I should say. Once I have that individual crease with the Payne's gray, I return to my dark green with the ultramarine blue, and I'm now just going to do little tick marks or dashes throughout the blossom just to give it some texture. Now, as I look over at my flower, you might also see the way it's kind of drying. I'm not going to go in and kind of fiddle with that. I'm going to let that be. I can soak up some of the puddling here, which is contributing to that little push of pigment into other zones. So I'm just soaking up that puddle real quick, but I'm still going to let that be. If I fiddle with it now, I'm going to make it worse. So I'm just going to hit this with the blow dryer so we can continue. Now that things are completely dry, I'm going to get some of my orange and I'm going to come into the corner of where this fold comes. I'm going to continue to use this orange to create some texture on the back side here. However, I think it's important to have a brush handy with some clean water so you can kind of soften some edges as you do this. So I'm going to come in and add some orange close to where the base of the flower is. But then while this is dry, or while this is wet, I should say, I'm now going to kind of pull some of that color out towards the outside edge. So I'm just using a damp brush to kind of pull that color out to create some petal texture. So I'm just using a damp brush to create some texture at the angles I want on the back side of this petal. While that area is drying, I'm going to come in to this fold here. And I'm coming in with my dark red, painting wet on dry. If I have too much paint on my brush, it's going to be really hard to keep the paint in small spaces. So I'm making a point to wipe away the excess paint before I come in and paint this fold. I'm just going to let that dry. I'm going to check in on how these other areas are, and they're still a little cold to the touch. So I'm going to spend some time adding some whites to this flower bud over here on the right. I'm going to do that using this bleed-proof white. So I have my colors the way I want, but now I just want to kind of brighten things up so it looks like things are backlit. So I'm taking a wet, small number 2 round into this white paint. And I just want to create like the little fuzzies or hairs that are on this stem. Very, very light touch, holding my brush very vertical. And it's important to not have too much paint on your brush. Otherwise, you're going to get really big, wide marks. It's also important to note that your brain's going to want you to make all the line work even and in a pattern with same lengths and so forth. That's not going to allow it to look natural and realistic. So really take a moment to study the reference photo and give some variety to the textures you're giving on the stem. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. And I'm going to continue with this white paint to create some of the texture that we have on the blossom. But I want to have some strong whites on the right edge where the light is hitting this blossom. I'm going to come in and just do some small little dashed lines closest to the right side. And when I have just a little bit of paint on my brush where it almost doesn't even want to paint, that's what I'm going to do these little wispy hairs and lines, because that ensures that I get some small, thin line work. When I do the texture on the back side, I have to really be cautious that I don't accidentally go into the blossom. I'm really keeping it on the outside edge. I'm just going to add a couple real thin little white tick marks inside the bud. I'm going to add a little bit of white to the right of my flower stem, just so it looks like it's glowing as well. I'm going to grab some of the red orange that I mixed up before and just add a little bit of color to this front petal and its fold. I'm going to continue with this red orange just to get some texture in this petal. Keeping my pressure really light. I'm going to continue with this red orange, creating texture on the fold of this petal. I'll continue with the red orange to create some texture on this petal here. And I feel like it's important to recognize that your texture doesn't have to be even in thickness, width, anything like that. But by giving it some texture, it just doesn't read boring. I'm now going to work a little bit on this central petal. Nothing on the right side is dry, so we have a clear space. I'm going to add some clean water with gentle pressure just to give myself some working time. And I'm keeping this water, towards the bottom 2/3. So if I tip my paper, you can kind of see where that water is. I'm now going to get some of my red and right at just the very base of the flower, I'm going to add some of this color. I'm kind of mixing the color in with the water on the paper so it's a little lighter in value. And then as I reach towards the top of the water, now for the edge, I just try to create some petal texture that kind of reaches up towards the edge of the petal. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I'm going to give that area some space to dry. And I'm going to grab some of my orange, but I'm going to water it down so it's not as dark. And I'm going to come into the back petal and give some texture to it. I'm going to grab a little bit of the white paint using my small brush. And I want to just kind of emphasize the light source that is hitting these petals. So right along this corner edge, I want some bright whites. And the light is kind of creating a shine on this little corner. So I'm just adding a little bit more thickness there. So just adding a few little white details. And then before some of those details dry too much, I'm going to use a clean, damp brush that has just a very small amount of water on it. And I can do some blending of some of this white paint. That way the edges kind of blend in with the petal and it doesn't seem so abrupt and immediate when it comes to the change of color. I'm going to get just a little bit more of these whites on the petal fold near the top here. I just want to kind of give an illusion of some glow. I'm checking in on this petal. It's still currently damp to the touch, so I'm going to hit with the blow dryer so I can get a little bit more texture in there. I'm going to get some more of the red on my brush. And I'm just going to paint wet on dry. And I want to imagine this petal going behind and creating a silhouette. A number 6 brush would probably have helped me out. Sometimes when you go too small, you can't paint the area fast enough to get your color in before it starts drying. Big brushes can be your friend. I'm going to continue with this dark red, and I'm just going to emphasize a fold that I have here on this petal. I'm going to get some of this red with a little bit of green. So it makes kind of this warm brown color, but nothing too dark. And I just want to create a little bit more of a silhouette of other petals that are in the background. So I don't want to go too dark with it. I'm going to take some of my red. And I just want to continue with some of the texture. It's always nice to take a damp brush and kind of pull the edges out so they kind of fade. I'm going to switch to my red orange just to get a little bit more petal texture on this particular petal. Notice how I'm not trying to make all the petal texture the same length or width. I'm embracing the texture for a reason. I think it adds interest. Now I'm just going to take a moment to pause and ask myself, is there anything I can do to help improve the contrast so my flower really stands out? And right now I feel like in the back corner here, the values are a little too similar for my preference. So I'm going to grab some of that orange red and I'm going to make the choice to paint wet on dry to darken up this back corner here so that the petals of this flower really pop forward and remain the focal point. Now I'm going to switch to my small brush and I want to get some of that really dark green that I added the Payne's gray to that I used over here for the split in the flower bud. And I want to darken up some of the color near the top of the stem, just on the underside of these petals. So I'm trying to create a very narrow disc shape. But I kind of want these colors to just naturally blend in with the stem. So the flower itself is creating quite the shadow on the upper portion of this stem. So I need to darken that up and make those colors kind of blend together. My greens went a little wide, so I'm just going to clean that up with a damp brush. Using just a little bit of a really soft, watered down brown, I can help push some of the shadows at the base of the flower. And it will also look like it's kind of the silhouette of some of the pollen that is inside the poppy. If the sun's coming this way, it's going to hit that pollen and create a shadow at the bottom of the petal. So coming in and painting some of that texture is going to actually help things look more realistic. I think I still need a coat of red closest to the base of the flower just to darken that up a bit. So I'm just checking to make sure everything's dry. I'm going to come in with my red, get it a little darker. This is my number 6. And I'm not going to go too far up. I'm now going to rinse my brush, remove the paint from it, I'm drying it off. And with this mildly damp brush, I'm just going to try and pull that top edge out so it kind of fades and blends in with the rest of that petal. I'm going to hit this with the blow dryer. Now that everything is completely dry, I just want to finish up some of my white highlights. I really want to give the appearance that this flower is in the direct sunlight, and that sunlight is kind of bouncing off some of the edges of these petals. I'm going to get some of my cadmium red, but I'm going to mix it with a very small amount of burnt umber to get a really nice dark burgundy color. Because there's a few areas where I feel like the colors could be a little darker just to give clarification of what's going on. So I'm going to add a little bit more shadow to the fold here. And I'm going to give a little bit more shadow to the silhouette. I can use this burgundy to help darken up some of the shadows from the pollen. But otherwise, I feel like this particular flower is done. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment, give it a thumbs up, or share it with a friend, and just keep painting.